Mr. Aguilar, the European Parliament has about 13, 14 months left of its mandate, and some people are afraid that this big migration package, which consists of 7 different legislative proposals, cannot be adopted, and it is left over to the next parliament. What do you think? What are the chances to work out a good solution for the migration problem?
You've said it right. Some people are concerned, among them myself. Many of us here in the European Parliament, we are concerned because we have done our best, actually. I can tell you for sure that this European Parliament has done its part of the job. You know where the problem lies? In the Council. And in a weak Commission, which has not been able to push its own legislation forward. Actually, it's been a shame that in the area of liberty, justice and security, where this whole migration package is framed, we made substantial progress in the last mandate. I chaired the Committee of Liberty, Justice and Home Affairs for 5 years. But in this mandate, we have not gone any farther. On the contrary.
Why did you give up?
Somehow we are stepping back. We're stepping back. And there are a number of considerations we may talk of. Of course, there is this security concern all across Europe. There is this mistrust, lack of mutual trust between the governments of the member states, lack of political will, and lack of strength of the Commission in order to push the legislation forward. So we are very much concerned that it could not be adopted. But believe me, from the European Parliament side, we are not going to give up. We're going to keep it forward all the way.
But how can you promote a compromise within the Council? It's a difficult task for you.
We are doing our best. I myself, I am the rapporteur for a number of files, including the visa code, the recast, including the own initiative report on humanitarian visas, which is a response to the lack of legal pathways and legal avenues that has been denounced so many times, not only by humanitarian NGOs, but also by lawyers, by churches, by observers of the whole situation as it stands. But we are doing our best in order to come to compromises with the Council. It only takes the Council, the rotating presidencies, one after the other in a row, to take consciousness that if they're not willing to compromise with the European Parliament, there won't be European legislation at all. And that is a situation that it's not going to change the day after tomorrow, because that is the rule of the game ever since the Lisbon Treaty entered into force. In order to legislate on migration, on asylum, on Schengen, on security matters, it's not anymore the realm, the exclusive realm of the member states through the governments, not even through the instrument of enhanced cooperation, intergovernmental cooperation. It takes European legislation through the legislative procedure, the ordinary legislative procedure, which means that we are co-legislators on equal footing to the Council. They should be aware of that in order to come to compromises with us, the same way we are ready to compromise with the Council.
But this is, I would say, the easier compromise, because there is another compromise as well within the Council, because there are great divisions between the eastern countries of the European Union and the western countries. It is perhaps because of the different historical backgrounds, because there are former colonial powers who, because of their conscience, they would like to do more for the people who are coming from the former colonies, or there are the eastern countries who have suffered under the Soviet colonialism. You, as a Spanish, Spain had colonies in the history, and Spain was also a dictatorship until the end of the 70s. How do you feel? Because you could feel both ways, I would say, as a representative of a country who knows what it is to live under a dictatorship and be liberated, and to handle former colonies as well.
Yeah, you're making a fair point. We are 28 member states, all of them unique on their own nature and coordinates, but we are all bound by the same rule of the game. We all subscribed to the Lisbon Treaty entering into force, which means that we have to accept that from the Lisbon Treaty, which entered into force in 2009, there is such thing as a qualified majority within the Council that can promote decisions that happen to be binding for all of the member states, no matter they voted yes or no within the Council. They should be abiding by the same law. And more than that, they should be also aware of the understanding that there are issues which long ago escape the capacity of response of each and every one member state on its own. We need each other. We need solidarity to be taken seriously. We need to go forward in mutual trust, in mutual recognition of the decisions that are made. And particularly, we need a council which is ready to abide by its own decisions. I think the most shameful scene of this whole sequence has been that we have seen time and again the Council making decisions denied by the member states that were members of that decision the very next day. That is the ultimate paradox. It shouldn't happen. We should understand that we need each other in order to respond to the challenge of irregular migration, to the challenge, of course, of security in the external borders of the European Union, in the challenge of standing up to our values while preserving the free circulation of persons, which is the most appreciated and valued acquis of all the European process. The European citizens love the free circulation of people. We should respect this goodwill from the European citizens by delivering, and it shouldn't happen that a whole mandate of the European Union Parliament comes to an end without delivery when it comes to updating our legislation. That goes for the migration package, that goes for the asylum package, that goes for the regulation of Dublin, that goes for every piece of legislation which is still pending of the Council doing its part of the job, the same way this European Parliament is doing its part of the job.
Practically, you answered one of my questions, because I wanted to put a question that within the Council there is a will, there is a tendency not to vote, not to put to majority vote the Dublin regulation, but instead try to find a compromise. Now the situation is changing a bit after the December summit, because their President Juncker said that if there is no compromise until June, then there could also be a vote. And you said that there is a majority decision in the Lisbon Treaty. There is the possibility, so the Council should vote on this issue.
Absolutely.
What would those deserve who do not want to take part in this solidarity process, who wouldn't like to accept migrants, who wouldn't take part in relocation? There are some ideas that those who are not fulfilling the European values, then European funds should be withdrawn from them, partly.
We should all agree that the Dublin regulation is not applicable anymore. It's not working. It's not functional. On the contrary, we are seeing that there is not only resistance to the acceptance that the member state on which the migrant or the asylum seeker knocks on the first door should handle the whole thing up to the very end. It is also clear that it is simply not working anymore. So we need to get it updated. And of course, I am a socialist, I am a Europeanist, I believe in some European framework. So I'm intending to promote harmonization and Europeanization of the response in order to update the Dublin regulation. But having said this, we're also willing to compromise. And I think that relocation and resettlement are complementary programs that should be taken seriously. The European Court of Justice has said it right, that when the Council makes a decision that is consistent with the primary European law, member states should be abiding by this decision, because that law is binding for all of the member states. We all know that some member states challenged those decisions before the European Court of Justice, but the European Court of Justice upheld those decisions being made and invalidated the claim that has been posed before the European Court of Justice by this number of member states, particularly the so-called countries of the Visegrad Group. So it's about time that we understand that we need to come to terms with facts, with reality, support each other, and try to build up some European response, because otherwise we are not honoring the commitment to integrate in Europe, but on the contrary, we are disintegrating the acquis that we had already achieved, which is the other way around. Things should work in the first place.
The European Parliament has a very strong and clear position concerning the reform of the Dublin regulation. But have you ever made an experiment like the scientists do? Let's suppose the new regulated Dublin regulation has already been in place in 2015. What would have happened with those thousands, tens of thousands who have arrived to Europe? How could have been they relocated from the first arrival to the various countries? It's an enormous infrastructural task. 10,000 migrants came to Hungary, for example, every day.
Let me answer by making it clear that, yes, you said it right, I am a Spaniard. And I think it is a shame that Spain has denied proper support to the situation that was overwhelming for the countries which were more exasperated by this external border challenge that they have experienced for the last 2 or 3 years over the so-called refugee crisis, namely Greece and Italy. Spain conservative government, Spanish conservative government has denied solidarity to Greece and Italy. And you know what happens? That the routes from the Central Africa northbound to the Mediterranean have simply been deviated. After Italy has come to terms with whatever is left of Libya in the Libyan side of the Mediterranean, they are now going to Spain. And you know what? Precisely now the government, the Spanish government, is claiming this is a European issue which needs and takes a European answer. Well, it was about time to understand that. What does it take? That each and every member state is overwhelmed by numbers, by figures which are difficult to handle, or that we establish some kind of scheme that is European in nature, so that we have a number of countries which are eligible to relocation according precisely to its capacity, because they have not fulfilled the potential that they were theoretically allocated or attributed through a rational diagnosis of the capacities of each member state in order to contribute to the common handling of the issue. That would be an answer to make sure that those asylum seekers do have a chance for family reunification when they have relatives which have already been established in some member state. That would be a part of the answer too, that we specifically protect very specially defenseless children and women which are most vulnerable. That would be a part of the European answer too. Of course, European funds. I'm not arguing for the withdrawal, the massive withdrawal of European funds to those countries which have been reluctant to accept the new logic. But I'm trying to convince that it takes a European answer, and we should all try to honor the principle that we subscribe to when we decided to be members of the Lisbon Treaty, entered into force in order to create an area of liberty, justice and security which is not anymore intergovernmental cooperation, but a truly European legislation which is binding to all of member states, no matter what was the position of each relevant national government when the decision, the actual piece of legislation was adopted. That would be a part of the answer. That is why we're trying to renew the Dublin regulation. But not only that, we are trying to invest more money into the programs, to invest more money into the relocation. We are trying to rebuild the European nature of the answer so that we do not subcontract or externalize the protection or the handling of the external borders of the European Union, as it was the case of the shameful agreement that was a couple of years ago adopted with Turkey, that has been extremely detrimental for the reputation of the European Union as a political project. So there are a number of elements that we should take into consideration in order to overcome this deadlock in which we happen to be, understanding the nature, the European nature of the challenge and the relative European nature of the answer.
You are also a member of this terrorism committee within the European Parliament, and many people speak about the relation between the increased migration and the danger of terrorism. Some people deny it. You, who have had first-hand information from experts, sometimes behind closed doors meetings, how do you see this situation? Are we really in bigger danger since the migration has started?
I personally have in my personal background, the experience of having served as Minister of Justice and Home Affairs in the Spanish government, the socialist Spanish government led by Prime Minister Zapatero, dealing with the #1 terrorist threat in Europe for decades by the name of ETA, a terrorist organization aiming the secession of the Basque Country from the rest of Spain, but ready to shed blood and kill innocent people and kill police officers and military officers and of course politicians and of course representatives of the people for the sake of, on the altar of the secession of the Basque Country. And we have converted our know-how, our skills, our capacity, our knowledge of the fight against terrorism in order to face new challenges, because it's a mutating, challenging phenomenon, this of jihadism and the return to Europe of the so-called foreign fighters, which happen to be European citizens that have been trained in order to cause casualties within Europe, but have been trained abroad in regions of conflict. All of these challenges have to be focused properly, which means not to be confused with migration issues. Terrorists are terrorists. Migrants or asylum seekers are not terrorists. They mostly flee from terror. Of course, we need to gather information. More than that, we need to share that information. We need to secure proper use of that information. Most of the attacks that have been perpetrated by terrorists in European soil for the last 5 years were not perpetrated by asylum seekers, by no means, or migrants. They were perpetrated by people that had been born in Europe, second, third generation migrants maybe, but born in Europe, European citizens of full right. That means that we need to get to know how radicalization takes place. We need to get to know how do they move, share information, prevent their attacks, identify the potential danger, the potential threats, and of course the real suspects, not making everybody a suspect indiscriminately, because we need to keep the proper balance between liberty, fundamental rights, including the confidentiality of the data of the European citizens, and security, which is also a fundamental right. By doing that, we need to build up a new European intelligence community, a new European law enforcement community, sharing information and police capacities in order to make sure that we are encapsulating terrorists and not making a confusion between terrorism, migration flows, asylum seekers, xenophobia, and paving the way to the disintegration of the kind of response that really makes sense in a civilized environment as Europe has the duty to be.
Mr. Aguilar, thank you for the interview. We have passed our time, but we could have talked a bit more. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you.